on threat hunting lessons you won't learn from guides and white papers. My name is Stephen Marshowitz. I am the Director of Program Development here at TrustedSec. First thing you'll notice probably in our presentation, if you've been here in the past, is we've gotten a graphic designer and it shows, so hopefully you enjoy that. Also, we have some general housekeeping items. It is being recorded, so you will get a copy of it, full replay afterwards. And then make sure you answer any questions you'd like in the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that we get to them all at the end. A quick background on TrustedSec. We have over 65 consultants now, with another 15 or so people supporting them, from research on the latest threats, creating new exploits and tools, an innovation team with a keen focus on new services and customizing assessments to your particular needs, as well as engagement management and quality assurance. So we've done quite a bit, continue to grow, and we still have a lot of reply all storms on a regular basis. We do start with the most challenging aspect of security, and that is understanding the real world effectiveness of your existing security controls, really against those skilled attackers using cutting edge techniques. Our company was founded on this principle, and we continue to drive that innovation through everything that we do. And then we really use that, across the different practices, so that when you get any kind of services from us, you're making sure that we're looking at it from the most advanced perspective possible. A few services to go over, particularly ones today, based on the fact that we're highlighting our incident response and threat hunting teams are, of course, threat hunting. You can always call us and ask for that information on that, especially if you've been breached. We've also gotten a few lately with the results of Log4j, so that's bumped up things quite a bit. Tabletop exercises, if you're really looking to get leaders of your organization involved in security and risk, it's a great way to do that in ways that reports can't do. Really makes it interactive, gives them the opportunity to see what it would be like if they really did have a breach. And then lastly, threat readiness assessments with various compromise simulations and specific controls reviews. So quite a bit going on with us here at TrustedSec. Okay, on to our speakers today. We have three great members of the incident response and threat hunting team, Justin Vaicaro, Ashley Pearson, and Leo Bastidas. Justin, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hey, this is Justin Vaicaro. I'm a principal incident response consultant over here on the IR team at TrustedSec. A little bit of background, just got a little over 20 years in the tech side of things here. Also, as you can see, I got some background with the Marine Corps and Air Force, combined total about 12 years for myself. I'm a NetSec nerd by trade, network engineering in my past. Then outside of kind of all of the, I'll call it nerd stuff, an avid triathlete and trail runner, and pretty much anything outdoors is kind of my bag. So that's a little bit about me. Toss it on over to Leo.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Hey, this is Leo Bastidas. Like my counterpart said, I'm a senior consultant here at the TrustedSec for the IR team. Have about 15 years in security, mostly in the DoD space. Came in as a military police, ended up leaving a few years ago and joined the private sector. It's pretty cool. To see some personal tidbits about me, I like to build my own keyboards. So let me hand it over to my counterpart, Ashley Pearson.
Hey everyone, I'm Ashley. I actually just recently joined TrustedSec after about 9 years, active duty Air Force. Just a little bit about me. I am a pet rescue addict. I have 4 rescues at home, 3 cats and a pit bull that we recently rescued during COVID. I'm also an avid gamer, mostly like first-person shooters, but I've been recently getting into like Sins of a Solar Empire and stuff like that.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So basically, what we've noticed over here, there's some awesome threat hunting research going on in the industry, but something we've identified within the incident response team that we've seen, most organizations, the question isn't necessarily how to put another high-speed detection query together, but how do they properly take those first steps towards implementing a long-standing threat hunting program? what does this actually entail? And how can this function complement and integrate with an already established security program that they may have? We only have a short hour to cover this huge topic, but hopefully by the end of the webinar and later reading through the provided resources that we have, everyone listening will have a better idea how to take those first critical steps towards launching and maintaining a successful threat hunting program. One thing I do want to throw out there is that we understand there's probably going to be questions throughout the presentation, but due to the time constraints, we would prefer addressing any and all questions at the end of the presentation. We should have about 15 minutes or so devoted to Q&A at the end. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and toss this over to Leo, who's going to be providing some solid overview of some of the key threat hunting principles the organization should be aware of prior to jumping into threat hunting activities. Next slide.
Go back one. Go back one. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to define threat hunting real quick and just make sure we're all starting off on the same page. So I took this white paper from Robert M. Lee and Rob Lee, and there are actually two different people. I had to look this up. They're not the same person, but they wrote a white paper and it was published in SANS, and the links will be at the end. But they wrote the who, what, where, when, why of how effective threat hunting. And it's a very good white paper, and most of the threat hunters has read this at one point or another, as a starting point. And pretty much it says the focus on iterative and approach to searching out, identifying, and understanding adversary internals to the defender's network. Threat hunting is focused on threats and who is already within the network and threat hunters organization, and do they have authority to collect data and deploy countermeasures. Okay, so I'm going to expand just a little bit on that. What does that mean? That means we're being, I hate to overuse this word, proactive before an incident happens. We're trying to go out and look for threats and incidents before they actually occur. Kind of like Time Cop, right? Where we're trying to find future crimes and we're trying to lower that attack surface. So this is one definition that most people agree with. And something you want to focus on is that first quote, iterative approach. So you want to focus on a specific either technique or data source, and you want to repeat that somehow, hopefully leading to automation. Next slide, please. So here's another definition from Richard Bitlick. Pretty much everybody that has done threat hunting or has looked into it, researched it a little bit, Googled it, they should come into Richard Bitlick's blog, Tal Security, right? He wrote about this in 2011. So this is how long, at the very least, threat hunting has been going on. I'll talk about the history a little bit here, but I'm just gonna give everybody a chance to read that snippet, and just highly recommend his blog, and where he talks about the origins of threat hunting. It's very cool insight, and you actually get even further. You get actually expand the timeline of threat hunting to the mid 2000s. Somebody named a prestigious person from NSA called Mr. Tony Seeger actually presented slides on hunt focus in 2009 from his office, the VAO office, in 2009. So, and it even predates that to the mid 2000s, somewhere in the government space. But this is the earliest documentation of threat hunting. So what's the benefits of threat hunting, right? All right. So you have a executive, you have somebody that went to a conference and they say, okay, we want a threat hunt. And now it's your job as whoever's taking the ownership of the threat hunt program. How do you show benefit to make sure this program is successful and showing value add to the team or organization you're at? Well, some of the things that happens as indirectly benefit, not just trying to expose APT and all the cool threats and ransomware groups, but also there's indirect benefits as well. You discover a lot of misconfigurations. You find all those servers that are public facing, and you see that RDP is exposed to the internet. By the way, most of the cases that we respond to, most of the incidents we respond to is exposed services in IR. So threat hunting gives you a benefit of locking down your attack surface. Also, if you're collecting the correct data, Do you have the visibility saying from workstation to workstation connectivity? Do you have that visibility into lateral movement? Asset management is always a big deal. Nobody likes to do asset management, but it's necessary, and it can help you fingerprint and label and identify all those assets in your environment, even the ones that aren't tracked. Patch management, are they up to date? Indirectly, you'll get to find out if these endpoints are up to date. You discover incidents, and you get to share what you found, not only with the security team, with IT teams, with network teams. You get to help them out. You say operational choke points. You might be able to help them out how to utilize the resources a little bit more for more fluid workflow. Next slide, please. So incident response and threat hunting, what's the difference? Incident is more a retroactive analysis. You're looking at something that occurred prior to, and you have that data to investigate. And it's triggered focus, right? If you get a trigger, you start analyzing and go back as much as you can with the logs available to you. Threat hunting, like I said, is a little bit more proactive, taking more initiative in order to spot the actual incidents before they happen. So you kind of have to think like an attacker and start saying, if I was attacking my organization, where would I come in from? Would I come in from a web server? Would I come in from an application that my customers can have access to and they have a username and password? You start thinking like an attacker. Just so we're all on the same baseline, incident response. Most people follow the six phase process of PIC ERL. So what's PIC ERL? It's preparation, investigation, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. So that's incident response. You see, is more of a retroactive analysis, and is more of putting out fires. That's your job, is to put out any dumpster's fire or any incident that's going on. That's your job. Threat hunting is more of a cyclic cycle where you have a process that is never ending. You're never gonna be done with threat hunting. Where instant response, as soon as you button it up and ribbon it up and recover it and you're back in production, you're good to go. You can close that off and ticket it and service now and close that ticket. And threat hunting is never ending. It's always something else you can look for. So that's why we have like a four-step threat hunting loop, where it's just a circle. You're just going round and round and never ending. All right. Now, threat hunting at the organization. So who does threat hunting? What does threat hunting at a typical organization look like? How often does threat hunting usually occur? Why do most organizations want to begin threat hunting in the first place? And how do you begin to develop a threat hunting program? So I'll try to answer these real quickly, just so we're all on the same page. Who does a threat hunting? Well, it's somebody that's defensive focus. Because you're part of the defensive effort to lower that attack surface for your organization. So you want to show benefits by either adding new detections, or knowing where all the secrets are at in your organization. So you want somebody that has defensive focus and has experience on how to incorporate intelligence as well. Somebody that can do the research of new tradecraft and trends of groups that are targeted to your organization. All right, so that's who usually does threat hunting. What does it look like? Usually, you have to ask the question of, okay, what current skill sets do we have, and staffing is necessary in order to meet our threat hunt needs. And do we have the operational bandwidth? Can we have a dedicated threat hunt team? That's some of the questions you're gonna ask. And how often do you occur? It can be bi-weekly, it can be quarterly, it can be monthly, it could be ad hoc even. So that's how often threat hunting occurs. Everybody does it differently. I was at one organization here in Austin where they don't have dedicated threat hunt teams, but they do it quarterly. They take their security people, and they even take IT and network administrators, and they do a court and they get volunteered for this quarterly threat hunt. So that's their whole job for a quarter, is to threat hunt, and then they go back to their respective teams. All right, and next slide, please. So let's talk quickly about what is an IOC or an IOC based threat hunting. So let me define IOC first. So IOC is usually described in the forensics world, right, as evidence of a computer that indicates the security of the network has been breached. Some type of incident of compromise, right? There's something solid that can tell you, okay, some type of compromise or security event has happened in my organization. Think of a hash, think of an IP address, uh think of those signatures for a file that can be considered an incident of compromise in the context of a security event. Then that's what IOC based threat hunting would be, is something that you take, say, a hash, and you look for that hash throughout the environment. That can be considered IOC based threat hunting. Next slide, please. And so in the same vein, there is a IOA as well, indicators of attack. Okay, so what's an indicators of attack? Indicators of attack is trying to detect the intent of the attacker. It doesn't matter what tool they're using, doesn't matter what malware they're using, doesn't matter what exploit they're using. You just know the procedures, and here goes the buzzword, TTPs, of tactic, techniques and procedures of the attack group that is targeting your organization. You know their methods. It doesn't matter what tool. You know they like to come in through a phishing campaign, and that's the way they like to get the initial foothold. So that's the difference between indicator of attack and indicator of compromise led threat hunting. So this will be looking at a APT 33 through their techniques, which they like to do service. They like to do scheduled services or scheduled tasks using a defrag and triggering a defrag to delete data. So that could be APT 33 indicator of attack based threat hunting. You know their technique, and that's where you're going to use their TTPs. Next slide, please. So when we start on threat hunting process during engagement, so how does that actually look like? So we get called up and they tell us, okay, we want to engage with you to conduct a threat hunt at our organization. And hopefully this can help out at your organization as well. Well, while we're doing a threat hunt, we like to give a daily status report. And so we give the note, so that way the client or the customer or the internal organization, they know what we're doing throughout the day. They know what we're hunting, what we're finding, what we're querying, what we didn't find, and what we proved true or false, right? What we our hypothesis, we create a hypothesis, and we have to try to prove that if it's true or false. And they know everything we're doing for that day. That way the customer, your customer, your executives, they know what you've been doing throughout the day. It's to show value and to show the benefits, and that way there is no secrets at the end of the threat hunt engagement of what you did throughout the threat hunt process. There's also, and you got to focus on your target audience as well. Remember, it's not just going to be a technical group reading your report, your findings, and you can have the most awesome discovery. You discover APT 300 in your organization, but you have to convey that message to the proper target audience, the executives and the technical people as well, because everybody's going to be reading this report. So you got to make sure you have executive summary in there, and you got to make sure you have your technical analysis in there as well, so you can give that product and deliver it to the appropriate teams, and they're able to digest it in their perspective, whatever that perspective is. It could be a business unit reading this report. And then it's good to call out the good things about the organization. When you do a threat hunt, don't just be the person that brings bad news. Make sure you highlight the strength of the organization as well. Like say that they have real robust logging. Call that out. Call the procedures or the data classification. Call the good things out, because you just don't want to go into a threat hunt and just call out bad things all the time. You also want to know what's working. The executives, the leadership, the key stakeholders, that you're going to provide them feedback, and you want them to know what is working in their organization and what's not working. That way they can tweak and focus resources at the appropriate target. So you want to call out the good things as well. And you also want to highlight how you're benefiting the organization with your threat hunts. You're doing this cool threat hunting program and you're discovering lots of cool stuff. Make sure you highlight how this improves the organization. This is, you kind of have to think of justifying your own program at the beginning, and then as soon as you establish that relationship and that trust, you know that these threat hunt program and the threat hunt cycles are bringing value add to the organization. All right, next slide, please. And how am I on time? All right, let me wrap it up here. The threat hunting process. So I'm not gonna steal nobody's thunder because this is gonna be talked about later, but we built a hypothesis based on the client's expectation, right? So just know there's a hypothesis, and that's gonna be talked about later, of what questions we try to answer based on the expectations. And then hunts will be based on threat hunting approach agreed to during the threat hunt engagement scope. So scoping is very important in threat hunts. You do not want to expand or scope creep in your threat hunting engagements, because you are going to discover misconfigurations. You are going to discover the cobwebs in their organization. And the first reaction usually is it's incident. It's a dumpster fire. All hands on deck. They pull you from the threat hunt engagement, and now you're responding to an IR. So you want to set expectations up front and make sure that you're not doing IR function unless it's APT 2000. And this is like high critical infrastructure, only the worst case scenarios, but you are going to have a lot of low to medium findings where you don't want to spin off an incident every single time and you get pulled from your objective, and that is to find evil in your organization, or find that certain APT group, find a certain exposure. You don't want to get taken away from that, so you want to set that up front. So another cool thing during the threat hunt process is the visibility gaps. So that's very important, especially for threat intelligence teams, for networking teams, for visibility. You have a SIM in place, but for whatever reason, you're not logging the command line. For whatever reason, there's logging that can be enriched, that can be improved, and you are going to discover, because data is your lifeline. Whatever's collected, that's your visibility. And that's how you go about a database threat hunting, is based on the collections they are aggregated at ingestion points, right? Or at centralized location, usually a SIM, sometimes it's not. It could be a Windows server. It can be a database server where it's being collected. We've seen it all. And if it is not being collected, well, that's a recommendation to improve the security, is we should centralize this logging. That way it'll make it easier to respond to incidents, And then the last bullet point, threat hunting queries can be used to enhance current SOC monitoring alerts playbooks. So this leads into automation. You don't want to repeat the process. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but just know your hunts should create detections, should create log enrichment, or it should create alerts. It should improve the whole instant response. If you have a SOC at your disposal, the SOC process to investigate incidents, and that way that dwell time, we talk about that dwell time of the attacker being in your infrastructure, gets reduced to a minimal. It's never going to be 100%, but we're throwing everything at our disposal, and this is how threat hunt can help that process. And next slide, please. And this is the threat hunting cycle, and this is going to be talked about a little bit later, but this is cyclic. is always going to be reoccurring. Create hypothesis, investigate, uncover TTPs, and then enrich data. This leads to automation, but this never ends. Like the pick ERL we talked about, instant response, you can close it up, archive it, and put it in a data storage or evidence locker, right? With threat hunting cycle, it's always improving, and you can go back to your old threat hunts, to your old hunts, and then update it to new techniques, new trends. We have new data stores, or you just want to find out, you want to do a QA check. So it's always cyclic. It is always never ending. So just realize that. And then this is more, yeah, next slide, please. And then how does that first phone call go? Like, it could be internal. It can be, you know, your hunt team, your security team talking to the executive team. It can be consultants like we are talking to that organization for the first time. And usually there's an awkward silence, right? How do you start that? Awkward silences everywhere. Well, we like to send out a questionnaire of some questions that we like to get answered, and this could be internal as well. Of, okay, so you want to start a threat hunt? How many endpoints do you have? How many servers do you have in your organization? What security stack do you have in place to take advantage of a threat hunt? What can we utilize in order to facilitate a good threat hunt? You know, that you'll be happy with. Do you have a security stack, security diagram or network diagram in place? Is it up to date? Are your data sources being tracked? Do you know where you log in? And do you have a data dictionary? Shout out to the OSAM project by Robert Rodriguez. He has a data dictionary created that we can look at on GitHub. I'll link that at the end. But usually it's a little bit awkward at first, but we put them at ease. We make sure we ask these questions in the questionnaire. That way we can get threat hunting started off in the right foot. And then afterwards, when us personally leave that organization, the infrastructure or the foundation is in place to take over that threat hunt program. So that's our goal personally, but these are some questions. You want to get some questions answered to get threat hunting program started off in the right foot. So with that, we'll go into preparation, and how that looks like in order to facilitate a great, mature roadmap to a threat hunting program.
All right. Yeah, this is Justin. I'm going to go ahead and take it over from here. Yeah, so just as Leo said, we're going to kind of pivot off of that information that Leo talked about and kind of dive in a little bit more on the actual threat hunting engagement preparation and the actual overview as it pertains to our TrustedSec, threat hunting engagements. Next slide, please. All right, so I know this adds a bit of humor to the start of a typical threat hunt engagement, but more times than not, most organizations don't really know what they really want to achieve outside of just finding bad in their environment. Although we can guarantee a high level of success using the find bad approach towards threat hunting, we strongly feel the more thought, planning, and guidance provided by our clients towards a focused threat hunt greatly increases the overall success of the threat hunt engagements. All right, next slide, please. All right, so 99% of the threat hunt engagements take a find bad approach that we've dealt with, or actually that we deal with. Organizations who've cultivated a higher maturity level in their threat hunting programs are better suited towards recommending an investigative hypothesis or awareness-based threat hunting engagement. First component in planning the threat hunt engagement is to try and identify the threat hunting approach to take if possible. So as you see, there's three approaches that we try and narrow the focus down. First one being investigation based. These could be thought of as extracting IOCs from threat intel reports and then basing hunts off of those extracted indicators. These would be considered more point in time threat hunts due to the nature of the extracted indicators. Another approach would be the hypothesis-based approach. This you could think of as being as hunts being mapped to a specific framework, such as MITRE ATT&CK. The last one being awareness based. This you could think of, if you have a focus for critical data, assets, or network segments that you want to focus your threat hunting around. The last approach being, what I briefly talked about before is a find bad approach. This is definitely a more generalized approach. It leaves a lot of room for the threat hunting itself, but doesn't really have a very focused effort in the actual threat hunting outcome. So let's take a look at 2 key planning topics. Next slide, please. All right, a way to assist in the planning of a focused threat hunt engagement is to understand the threats and/or threat actors targeting your organization. This is where we can help guide an organization during the threat hunting scoping to make the threat hunt highly relevant towards your goals and engagement expectations. Understanding these threats as they pertain to the particular business sector you're in, geographic regions you may reside in, proprietary information of value that you have, etc., will significantly increase the organization's capabilities surrounding specific threat hunting goals and drive these following points: targeted threat hunts, mapping out of specific hunts around specific threats or threat actor TTPs, and then what we like to call the crown jewel hunting focus, which is again, focusing around the critical data or assets or network segments. Again, the focus here is to work towards narrowing that focus of threat hunting, the threat hunting engagement as a whole, if possible. So again, many organizations don't have a formal threat hunt, or I'm sorry, a threat intelligence team created. So much of the threat intelligence that can be derived from most organizations is pulled from vendor-provided threat intel feeds that are either directly ingested into the deployed security stack devices via email distribution, RSS feeds, etc. So the auto-generated threat intel, and most of it is actually threat data. It's really not threat intel at this point. They're typically atomic-based indicators that may not be relevant to the actual organization. The atomic-based indicators are primarily, IP addresses, email addresses, domains, etc. They're known bad, but they may not be known bad to your organization. So what can you do to, achieve some of this threat intel? So a few ways organizations can derive the applicable threat intel towards your organization would be manually scouring relevant threat intel write-ups, researching specific blog posts, staying up on some relevant Twitter Twitter activity, etc. Another way to do this is to perform your own research on relevant threat campaigns that may be taking place, understanding, again, the threat actors that pertain to you. So an important aspect to remember is that the threat data must be analyzed in order to provide the correct levels of associated impact and relevance to your organization before it actually becomes threat intelligence. So there's that difference there between threat data, which is more generalized data, and then turning that into relevant threat intelligence. Yeah, thanks. Although these next 2 slides here, they're not a comprehensive list of all the questions to address. It just continues to dive a little deeper into the level of preparation an organization should take prior to a threat hunting engagement. Having a complement of business level goals assists in strengthening the focus of the threat hunting, overall threat hunting goals and objectives. So some of these questions that you should consider are, what does the organization intend to achieve? Are there specific portions of the network, again, physical sites, critical assets, data sets to focus on? These are actually things that a lot of organizations actually aren't aware of. So these, again, are questions that are something to at least, spark a little bit of thought into the actual threat hunting engagement itself. And then does the threat hunting assessment need to meet any overall business objectives? Next slide, please. All right. So recently we worked a threat hunting engagement within a client's cloud environment. A few of the critical aspects that affected our threat hunting capabilities were these two things that stood out the most. Were the ingested logs within the SIM weren't actually normalized. They did a great job by getting the logs forwarded into the SIM, but unfortunately, to make them useful in a threat hunting scenario, they needed to be normalized. So there was a lot of struggle there to correlate the various logs that were ingested into the SIM. And being that it was a cloud environment, there was also a heavy container or a presence. One thing that we did stumble across there is that there were no container-based log visibility. And so as we started digging into our threat hunts there, we basically came to a point where we hit a brick wall and we couldn't dive in any deeper due to that log visibility gap. So these are aspects that should be identified prior to threat hunting engagement. But on the flip side, these are areas that TrustedSec would be able to assist the clients in addressing within our engagement findings and overall security recommendations. So some of the additional questions to consider: does the organization understand the current detections already implemented, and what security solutions are providing these detections? Again, this is another area where organizations, they put in best of breed security solutions, but they really don't have a good understanding of the underbelly of how the detections are working. Are they robust enough to actually consider viable, from an alerting perspective? Does the organization understanding the existing logging visibility gaps? Again, this is where a lot of the security teams may have a disconnect because they're not actually part of the operational teams within the organization. Does the organization have a listing of data sources currently being collected that will be used to perform threat hunting activities? Again, some of the security teams don't necessarily have full visibility from an operational perspective. Again, for many different reasons. They just don't own the security infrastructure. They're not part of the don't necessarily have the role or responsibility of the logging and so forth. One thing to take note of, though, if there are logging and visibility gaps that an organization needs assistance with prior to an engagement, TrustedSec has the capability of deploying tools to assist. And these being specifically, we have our own EDR endpoint agents that we can deploy across the endpoint landscape there. We also have some custom network sensors that we can deploy to add additional network telemetry and so forth. Next slide, please. Yeah, so our threat hunting approach is 100% customized to the client's engagement goals and objectives. If a find bad approach is preferred, we'll utilize our pre-built threat hunting playbooks. These playbooks are specifically built around legitimate incidents that we've worked, extracting, the activities that we've identified, TTPs that we've identified. We also do a lot of research and stay current with, evolving attacker TTPs, active threat campaigns, obviously zero-day exploits, etc. If a targeted approach is preferred, we will build customized playbooks based on the client requirements. One of these specifically would be, if there's a specific APT group, that the client would like to focus on. We've, as an example, for an oil and gas client, we, specifically right from the scoping call, they called that out as a interest for the threat hunt. So we, did our research around the specific APT group. We put together a known list of TTPs that we were aware of, but then we also, it came within a day or two of the actual engagement, we noticed that there was a relevant threat intel report that was just released. So what we did was we extracted those fresh indicators of compromise, applied that to the threat hunt, and actually had hits from those indicators that we pulled in that client's environment. So that gives you a little example of how much planning and preparation we do going into threat hunts. So TrustedSec has spent a significant amount of time putting together the detailed individual threat hunting playbook. So regardless of the agreed upon threat hunting approach, the threat hunting engagement is going to be very focused and relevant to the client organization. Next slide. All right, so communication, again, this is going to pivot off of some of the information that Leo communicated, but communication is very important during a threat hunting engagement. So it's critical to address the following topics to ensure there's clear and concise communication processes agreed to prior to the engagement start. So what does this look like? Again, daily status reports. We basically put out mini reports each day of the threat hunt. So when a client sees our status reports, it's not just a series of bullet points. There's an actual executive summary that's put in there. There are action items and potentially remediation items for the client to follow up on. There's a very detailed low-level output of our analysis that that we complete during each day's worth of threat hunting. Through the communication questions that we ask, we like to establish a communication cadence. Some clients, prefer, hey, the end of the day communication, that suffices. That's perfect for us. Other clients want to have, the daily kind of status update to see, how things are going, what have you. The method of communication, sometimes, email isn't enough. They definitely want to, stay in tune. It could be text messaging, could be their out of band, communication method that they have, whether it be like Signal or what have you. Some other key points here are the technical and business points of contact. These are actually very critical to have because it's going to pivot into the next bullet points here. These are necessary so that if and when we have a critical finding, we know exactly who to reach out to and the method of communication to use to get in touch with these people. And then the last bullet point, and this goes a little bit further as far as criticality. If a critical finding then pivots into a legitimate incident, what does that process look like? How should we, what steps do we need to follow within the engagement, to follow the proper protocol? So this level sets the communication that can be expected, from TrustedSec and identifies, what's required from our clients. All right, so engagement outcomes. So outside of identifying the attacker activity, which we've kind of focused on here. So during the threat hunt engagement, we also encounter two critical finding areas that a lot of organizations may not think about. One of these being business process flaws that are uncovered. One example that I could maybe kind of put some perspective on that is during one of our threat hunts, we identified a suspicious outbound RDP connection. That connection actually turned out to be a Synology NAS device, but it was located in Hungary. It wasn't managed by the client. Later, it turned out to be something of interest, and unfortunately with the engagement, we weren't able to follow up fully on that, but we did provide all the relevant information regarding that finding. But what this did identify was a business process that should be investigated to harden unnecessary outbound protocol communication use, in this case being RDP. Another critical area that we find aspects that could be worked on are security operation misconfigurations. To give you some perspective on this, an example of this would be during one of our threat hunts, we identified critical event ID 4662 not being forwarded to the client SIM. What this identified is a monitoring and detection gap surrounded DC sync attack activity. It prevented the possibility of actually detecting that type of attack. So again, wasn't necessarily finding bad, but as you could see, those two areas are very critical in as additional findings. So performing the associated remediation and building the contextual information around these sort of findings help to build an organization's foundation for higher fidelity threat hunting activities in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, engagement knowledge sharing. So these are areas that we feel our clients receive the greatest value from the engagement. A few things we take pride that we pride ourselves on with our threat hunting reports is the level of detail surrounding each individual hunt and the overall amount of knowledge sharing we include. Some of the examples being a detailed end of engagement report readout. We spend a significant amount of time going over the report in depth based on the client's feedback and what they actually want to hear. But we offer that opportunity to give an end-to-end detailed report of what our activities look like outside of those the standard daily status reports. Our reports also include all of the threat hunt queries that are used. So that way, what that provides the client, it allows them to pivot off of those queries. If they do have, we'll even call it a detection engineering team, they could then pass those over to that team, and they can fine tune them, polish them off a little bit, and put them into production monitoring. We also include all the threat hunting methodology and processes we followed during the engagement. Again, sharing that knowledge so that the client organizations can take note of what we did, how we did it, and again pivot off of that and make those steps into the next maturity level. The individual threat hunts are mapped to MITRE ATT&CK framework itself. So we do go that extra step to place that in there again to provide the capability of the organization to see how that could actually map over into MITRE ATT&CK. We also provide examples on how to build out future individual threat hunts. Again, taking that opportunity to share the knowledge with our clients. Another important aspect to our reports is the level of thorough security recommendations that we provide. We take every finding and correlate these to hardening recommendations that once they're implemented should hopefully shrink the organization's threat landscape. Also with this, our main goals that we strive to achieve during the threat hunting engagements are these bullet points here. Sharing threat hunting knowledge, improve our clients' defensive posture, and most importantly, instill the importance of learning, what a proactive hunting mindset looks like. And next slide.
Great. Hey, I'm going to take over this last section, the post-threat hunting engagement and how to maintain your threat hunting activities. So there are a lot of different situations where a threat hunting program or engagement can be appropriate. We've talked about a couple of these, but just as a summary, mergers and acquisitions are a great situation where you may want to assess the overall security posture of an organization that you're acquiring or merging with. This not only identifies potential integration roadblocks, but may also help facilitate the acquisition itself. Additionally, in the unfortunate scenario where perhaps a newly acquired organization has an unknown threat within their environment, a proactive threat hunting engagement can help identify this prior to merging with the parent organization's network. For security programs that maybe don't have a formal security operations center established, this can also be applicable if you have more of just a generalized security program and you want to introduce proactive security measures or simply increase your internal network visibility. In this situation, you may already have some formal or informal incident response personnel or security analysts with some roles and responsibilities established, but haven't really taken that first step into a proactive approach yet. And then finally, if you do have a full-on security operations center or even just an internal threat hunting program already established, we do also do threat hunt program assessments. The initial preparation actions taken, coupled with any of the findings that we may find during a threat hunt engagement, will also give you a pretty solid idea of where you lie along this threat hunting maturity model, right? This also applies for an organization that you may be acquiring to during that merger and acquisition threat hunt. So I look at this as sort of a spectrum that you can move up and down, not just as a program as a whole, but also for individual threat hunts as well. While the eventual hope is to reach that level 4 state where you've got a lot of heavy automation and routine, centralized data to facilitate threat hunting and other security program functions, the reality is that a lot of organizations, especially those starting out, are kind of sitting more towards the left side of the spectrum here. And like I mentioned, this is a good framework to base not just your whole program on, but also those individual hunts. And Justin touched on this a little bit earlier, but TrustedSec's approach to threat hunting incorporates threat hunts that may fall along pretty much any area of the spectrum in terms of maturity. The beginning of our engagements typically leverage threat intelligence indicator searches or those IOC searches that Leo mentioned. Some low-hanging fruit hunts is usually how we refer to them as, while the latter half of an engagement targets behavior that is typically much more difficult to detect and is up towards the top of that pyramid of pain. However, those more advanced threat hunts do require a lot more data availability and access to in-depth endpoint and network telemetry. So being able to pinpoint where you are on that spectrum, oh, if you could go back real quick, sorry. This will really help tell you where you are and then how to move forward along the model here. And the two biggest things that impact your position along the spectrum are organizational support and operational constraints that exist within the organization. Next slide. So an effective threat hunt requires time. The most effective teams have dedicated personnel within the organization and support and leadership backing. If there's upper management buy-in to the value that your threat hunting team can provide to you, it means that the outputs, whatever they may be for that particular hunt, will be more robust and implemented far more quickly. There will also be an increase in data sources necessary to effectively threat hunt. And honestly, that extra data that you get is also really useful for troubleshooting and incident response in general. Your security control recommendations are a lot more likely to be implemented and actually enforced rather than just implemented and forgotten. And there will be an organization-wide process improvement. This time and the organizational support is necessary both before and after your threat hunting engagement. The time spent preparing or researching for a threat hunt is just as valuable as the time given after to generate and address your lessons learned. The organizational support is also really beneficial for any of those use cases I mentioned earlier, and it's especially true if you have a regular threat hunt engagement scheduled with our team. The more mitigation actions you take, the more recommended security controls you implement and enforce, and the visibility gaps you address, the stronger your security posture becomes, and the better your threat hunts will be in the long run. And while this sounds like a huge undertaking, generally speaking, the roadblocks that we encounter have a lot of very easy ways to make really big improvements in a short amount of time. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit here. So the more you begin to move toward and stay towards the right side of that model, the smaller your visibility gap should become over time. And the best way to establish this long-term success is by ensuring there's a lot of support throughout the entire process. So it's vital that organizations understand the potential operational constraints that can affect your threat hunting results to maximize the success of your engagements. And increasing awareness about your environment, both pre and post threat hunt engagement, will really help with that overall security posture and set yourself up for success in the long run. This is the case for both internal threat hunt program expectations as well as any third-party engagements you may have. So for an in-depth understanding of your security operations, your infrastructure, and your logging capabilities will take you a really long way. So asking yourself questions like, do you know what known good network and endpoint activity looks like in your environment? What blind spots currently exist? The log sources you have available, how they can be used to facilitate your threat hunting, and any critical assets and maybe where they're located in the network. And then as far as your personnel goes, do you already have people in your organization with the skill set and staffing necessary to meet your threat hunting needs? And if you have technical skills available, have you considered maybe some of the non-technical skills that may facilitate this as well, like a higher tolerance for false positives? If anyone's done any threat hunting, you know that a lot of the time you set up a hunt, you spend days or weeks looking for it, and then you end up finding nothing in your environment. So that innate curiosity will really take you a long way during a threat hunt. And these are much harder skills or even impossible to teach. So if you have the current skill set, do you have the operational bandwidth to even assume these additional roles and responsibilities? Do you have the budget or resources to assume any of these responsibilities? And if not, should you maybe engage a third party to continue handling these requirements? And like I mentioned earlier, the time given to your team doesn't just refer to the time actually spent hunting, but also making sure that they're not overburdened and you're not inadvertently burning your people out. And that doesn't mean that their only function needs to be threat hunting. Like Leo said earlier, sometimes the time just means 1 month a quarter or a couple weeks a quarter, something like that. It's going to be organization specific. And like I said, spending time after a threat hunt to generate lessons learned is just as important as the time spent preparing for a threat hunt. Next slide. Okay. As Justin mentioned earlier, threat hunting really does entail a lot more than just the actual threat hunting. So to address some of the roadblocks that we talked about earlier, we can understand the people, processes, and technology, as well as acknowledging that some of these roadblocks are going to be organization specific, and it can really help steer your internally generated threat hunts, or even better align a TrustedSec engagement to your own organizational goals, as well as help with that continual improvement for your overall organization. So first and foremost, we can establish communication lines between analysts, your IT personnel, and your leadership to help increase your odds of sustained maturation and success. There are also several stages involved in the planning process, and it greatly benefits your organization to understand your environment at the operational level. Again, not just before a threat hunting engagement, but as you try to implement those proactive detection capabilities. So being aware of things like current threats targeting your organization or your sector and your crown jewels. You can also improve your visibility a multitude of ways, but some of the easiest ones are just if logs are available, can you centralize them in any way to increase your log retention? Can you tune existing alerts you have, or can you identify any areas where you may be able to enhance native Windows logging or native Linux logging? And if you don't know some of these things before an engagement, spending time after an engagement to work on those things can really help, but the continual success is reliant on due diligence and that organizational support I mentioned earlier. So when is the right time to begin threat hunting, whether that's an internal one or a third-party engagement? If you're wanting to gain an understanding of your environment, the threats facing your environment, ensuring your crown jewels are adequately protected. If you're looking to improve the overall security posture of your organization, including limiting those blind spots as much as possible or gaining some situational awareness into those blind spots, or if the while the ultimate goal is to have your threat hunts shift your organization to a proactive stance, there can be both proactive and reactive threat hunts. Proactive in the sense that you're trying to get ahead of an attack before it's entered your environment by identifying some behavior indicative of maybe new or novel threats. Log4j was mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. And actually, Leo and I were on a threat hunt engagement recently, right when Log4Shell dropped. So we pivoted our threat hunt to start looking for IOCs and TTPs indicative of Log4Shell as they were being publicized. And Justin also did an engagement recently that was very similar to that, where we really focused on like a new and novel threat that was kind of developing every day. I feel like there is a bunch of changes to all the Log4Shell IOCs and how to obfuscate it and how to detect it. So having that proactive threat hunt is a totally legitimate way to threat hunt, but you can also have reactive threat hunts as well, where maybe you're doing an active incident response engagement and you need to supplement that with threat hunting to make sure that you've fully eradicated a threat in your environment. Next slide. Okay. And just to kind of wrap things up for process improvement, I know a lot of you are probably going to see KPIs and OPMs on here and be like, oh my gosh, no more KPIs and OPMs, please. However, these are important and they're used in a lot of organizations. And while some seemingly obvious metrics are to measure like number of threat hunts performed, number of times your team caught bad, I strongly consider organizations to consider that sometimes your threat hunts are going to take several days or several weeks to prepare for and plan for and execute, which may affect your numbers throughout the quarter or the year. So setting a goal to complete a hunt every week maybe isn't the most realistic KPI or OPM. And your threat hunts are not always going to result in finding bad, but may instead identify other just as valuable things or visibility gaps in your organization, which is exactly why that organizational support and communication is vital to long-term success. Setting reasonable expectations for your threat hunting team, keeping communication lines open, and transparency are going to foster a really nice environment for your threat hunters to kind of grow up in. And some great metrics to determine whether your threat hunters are maintaining some maturity or improving over time is to generate those lessons learned, identifying experience, knowledge, or capability gaps, single points of failure, whether that's a technological one or a personnel one, and improving all of your reports. You can also use these to develop new playbooks, whether that's an internally created one or a third-party one that you're kind of adopting to your organization. All of these are really valuable ways to continually improve the processes, not just with threat hunting, but with other areas in your operations center as well. And don't forget to share your lessons learned internally to your team and externally to the other members of your security program. You can create easy to consume training for your analysts at a very technical level, but then also bring that up a couple levels and create organization specific user awareness training using these lessons learned and the reports that you're generating. And then just to end things off here with some recommended reading, these are some links to a lot of the different blogs that we referenced through my section and Leo's and Justin's.
All right, great. Well, we still have quite a few questions going, so we will keep it going. Our first one is from Wes. At the end, I'd be curious Leo's thoughts on purple team activities versus threat hunting.
So there's definitely, thanks for that question, Wes. There's definitely a overlap, but there is different focuses. Usually the threat hunt team is more from, usually is under the CTI umbrella, the threat intelligence umbrella, and they're more defensive focused. And we're looking to improve, and everybody's playing for the same team, right? Purple team is helping the organization. So are we. They're usually more offensive focused, or in the previous life, they're offensive focused, previous pen tester, and we're usually defenders, or we're directly ingesting threat intelligence to conduct our hunts and to keep up the trends. They're more on the side of they're going to simulate a attack venue or attack avenue, and then create a detection for that specific attack technique, and then help you improve. And they do a lot of other stuff as well. I'm sorry, I'm just not up to date on the whole encompassing purple teaming, but there is a lot of overlap, and we do work together a lot quite often, especially when creating detections. And I have seen purple teams be threat hunters at organizations, at pretty prominent organizations. And I also seen threat hunt teams be under CTI, and or just being voluntoed from different organizations to hunt for this quarter. That's your job. You're getting pulled from the network security team. You just hunt for threats on this quarter. There's definitely a lot of overlap, but we can help each other out and improve either the SOC or the security as a whole to lower the attack surface. Just different focuses and different areas of expertise is the main difference that I see personally.
Okay, great, thanks. Micah, it seems like a lot of threat intel focuses on critical infrastructure and large organizations more likely to face intrusions from APTs. What do you find small, medium-sized businesses struggle to find, or how do you look to help them? Any suggestions for SMBs to form relevant hypotheses?
Yeah, this is Justin. I'll take the first stab at that one. Yeah, so I guess within my section, I kind of covered a little bit of that, but I'll expand on that. I agree with you. A lot of it is geared towards, larger organizations and more critical infrastructure. But what you can do is a lot of your own personal research. And the way to do that is to take some kind of perspective as far as where you work, your organization, what business sector do you sit in? what geographic locations do you reside in? You know, are you just a US based organization, or are you geographically dispersed? Because that will definitely help out with some of that intel gathering also. And then also, what's your proprietary information? Do you, who are your competitors? You know, what would attackers be interested in, once they compromise your environment? So with that being said, you can pull all that information together and do your own research around those specific threat actors. And threat actors, again, could be geographically focused. They could be business sector focused. They could be proprietary information focused. If you've got a key application that you've developed that an attacker would specifically be attracted to. And then from that information, you can build those hypotheses off of that information. And again, if you know specific threat actors that you're targeting, you could then, as a reference point, use MITRE ATT&CK and look at the known TTPs, the software that the threat actors use, just for examples. And then again, build a hypothesis off of those, off of that information that you just manually gathered. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, great. One more. Please give your opinion on implementing approaching threat hunting in on-premise and hybrid environments versus the fully cloud-based environments, and additionally with the vast majority of workforce being remote.
Yeah, sure. Leo, I guess, or Ashley, I'll chime in and let you guys pivot off of that one, but it's actually pretty fun because I just came off of a threat hunt that was both of those. One of them was more of an on-prem corporate type environment. And then the next one following that was 100% cloud-based. So there are, some differences in the approach that you take, but I think really what it boils down to is understanding those logging sources. What do you have at your disposal, to provide the threat hunting telemetry that you're going to be working with? Some of the examples that I talked about were some of the logging and visibility gaps within that cloud environment. It wasn't, the fault of the client. It just happened to be, again, some of the things that we talked about. The client just didn't have the actual ownership of the logging infrastructure, the SIM, for example. They didn't own it, so they couldn't manage it, and they could not tune the logging that they needed to. They had to rely on another team and basically the timing of that team and so forth. So you can see there's some constraints that, depending on the structure of the team environment, it's going to dictate as far as the capability of that threat hunting team. Again, the corporate environments, may be a little bit more robust, but again, it's going to be, do you understand those logging sources? Do you understand from an operational perspective what's deployed in the environment? Because again, the threat hunting team may not actually be the operational team that actually deploys the infrastructure and manages that infrastructure. They may only, worry about the logging visibility, but not necessarily understanding all of the logging sources. And by not having that understanding, there may be some visibility gaps from a hunting perspective that you won't uncover until you actually start doing those hunting exercises. Leo or Ashley, do you guys have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, you answered pretty good. Especially we use whatever's at our disposal. Azure, we use Sentinel, that's in place. They have some minimal, depending on the licensing package you have, right? That's a whole different talk on just in the licensing of Microsoft. But they have certain tiers have threat hunt capability. We use that as well. Making sure that the login in whatever cloud provider you have, we're able to hunt through. AWS has the same thing for their environment that's connected to their infrastructure, and same thing with GCP. So we utilize what they have, or either by extracting those logs with some type of script, or using the built-in tools in, say for Azure, we use their threat hunt and MDE, right? And what is it, managed defense for endpoints, I believe they call it now. So yeah, and then when it comes to remote users, you still have to connect. If they're connecting to the network through VPN, they still have to come in through VPN most of the time. If that's how the policy is set up. So as soon as they connect to that network, it's just new data source is that VPN login when it comes to remote users. But then it does get a little bit more complicated with split tunnel and stuff like that.
Our last one, any good resources for any open source playbooks?
Yeah, I know Splunk has, and again, these may be, specific to, certain vendors and platforms and so forth, but what I can see the value in it is, although they may be specific to a specific platform, you can pivot off of that and make them relevant to the environment that you're in. I know Splunk has a lot of pre-built playbooks that they offer, for free within their blog posts that they have out there. Trying to think which other one. I think Sans even has some baseline ones to work off of. I would have to do a little bit more research to throw some additional ones out there. But I know for a fact, just working through the Log4j stuff, we actually utilized some of the pre-built ones that Splunk already put together, and then pivoted off of those to build out our own. So that would be just a simple example out there.
That's a great point, one to bring up. If we didn't get to your question today, or you have other questions that you didn't remember, definitely feel free to shoot us an email. We're always happy to answer questions, take some time to work with you. It's one of the things that we really do and really strive for at TrustedSec, is to help you with the different things that you need. And certainly if it's, just some questions, we have a lot of resources that are experts. And we always say there's no one person who's an expert at everything. So if we don't have the answers now, we'll definitely get it to you. But absolutely take advantage of the fact that you can ask us any kind of questions when that you want, and reach out to us directly. Okay, with that, I want to thank you all so much for joining, and definitely thank Ashley, Leo, and Justin. You guys did a great job. Really appreciate it, and look forward to our next webinar. Thanks so much.